Hello, and welcome to the first mindset module. This module is all about how we define emotions and how we currently process them. You may remember from my introduction video that there will be two series of modules, the first of which focuses on how we currently define our current situations and define where we are at the moment, before the second series goes on to explain an alternative way in which we can find our path to our own inner peace. So I thought I'd start with defining emotions, because when we think about emotions themselves, if you're in England at the moment, you probably realise that we haven't had any formal education in our school lives to understand what emotions are, how we deal with them, and even how we define them. Now, you also may remember that we've had some kind of personal, social, health education amongst like our maths lessons, our science lessons, etc., but nothing that talked about our emotions, so that when we look to resolve them in the real world, we're kind of left a bit clueless. So this is where I think this module would be a good place to start off with. So in terms of defining an emotion for what it actually is, to mind, you may think of emotions that you've experienced recently. So these may be positive emotions, or I should say positive emotions like happiness, ecstasy, laughter, enjoyment, versus emotions you want to ignore or shy away from. So things like anger, rage, embarrassment, grief, despondency. But those, I guess, are examples of emotions. But the actual definition of an example is that, neuroscientifically speaking, an emotion is a chemical reaction in our brains and systems that typically last for about 90 seconds if we just let them pass through our system and out again. Sounds simple enough, right? I mean, 90 seconds is what? A minute and a half of time? But what's going on at the moment is that we take this reaction, this chemical reaction in our systems, and we catch it. And we catch it and respond to it. So it might be a physical reaction via our bodies. It might be a verbal reaction via our voice. The point is, that emotion is left unprocessed and we store it away somewhere in our system. Now, we'll go on to talk about unresolved trauma and experiences and emotions in a future module. But when we look at it in terms of the definition of the emotion, then it is just a 90-second chemical reaction in our brains that we're currently catching and therefore not processing in full. So you might ask, well, why is that then? Why, if it's simple enough, do we not just let the emotion pass through our system, and why are we getting into emotional tangles at the moment? So to answer that, we go back to the question of how we begin to process emotions. So to begin with, at a deep subconscious level, when we're born, we're completely reliant on the first people that we're handed to when we're born. So that's typically going to be our parents. And straight away, we will just react to whatever sensations we're feeling at the moment without even defining what we're doing. So if you think about when a child is born, straight away, we might think of the fact that the child is crying. Now, that crying is unfiltered. It's not preconceived. It's literally the child screaming out loud for long periods, going red in the face, wriggling their arms and legs quite a lot. And that's all done without any sense of who's around them, so they're not conscious of, there's a lot of people, so I can't, cry out loud. The child will just show the emotions it is feeling. Now, I could do a whole nother module about why that is, and the idea that we learn from our caregivers that certain behaviors and emotions aren't acceptable, which is where we start to define positive and negative emotions. But ultimately, the point I'll make here for now is that at a deep subconscious level, we want to do everything we can to please our caregivers so that they keep us alive. Because when we're born, we're not able to fend for ourselves. We depend on our caregivers to essentially teach us the ropes. So therefore, if we do something that elicits a reaction from them, so if they say, don't cry, or don't do this behavior, or don't say that, then the message we get is that right, if I display that behavior, that means I'm not accepted, I'm not good enough, and they might not take care of me, and I might die. Now, that sounds a bit extremist, but that's the message that we're subliminally getting, even though the reaction might not have been that harsh in the first place. It might have been quite innocuous. So when a parent, for example, says don't cry, they're not dictating the child not to cry, but they're just trying to soothe them and do what they know and have seen other people do. But yet the subliminal message we get is that, right, I shouldn't really be crying here. But it goes against what we naturally feel. So I mentioned a baby on delivery crying, but if we consider when we grow older, the same unfiltered kind of reactions are there. So if you think of a toddler having a tantrum, they're lying on the floor, stamping their feet, bashing their fists around, repeating words, a lot of crying, a lot of, gulping of air. It doesn't change. So they're still showing the unfiltered emotions because they've got no inhibitions about them. That's what children will typically do. And that's how we experience emotions before anyone teaches us to do otherwise. We just naturally express what we're feeling inside our bodies. So if that's how brand new humans experience emotions, then why is it that we rarely see adults showing their emotions in the same way, particularly when it comes to things like tantrums or crying? Well, it goes back to what I just said about the instructions we receive from our caregivers about, not crying or not displaying that behavior. So this is where we disseminate between positive emotions and negative emotions. So we quickly understand as, young beings that, okay, if I display this set of emotions, I get accepted, I get rewarded, I get more care given to me. So I will display more of these. So these are things like, good behavior and listening and attention giving, etc. Versus things like, being angry or shouting or crying, which is natural, but we're told not to experience them. However, now this is the key point. The problem is never our emotions. The problem is what we've been taught to think and feel about our emotions. So the idea that some of them are bad and therefore not acceptable, and some of them are good and therefore should be felt more than anything else. And if we're not feeling the good ones more than the bad ones, then there's something wrong with us. So we learn from a very young age to repress what we consider to be bad emotions like fear, anger, anxiety, sadness, jealousy, self-pity, because we're trying to please our caregivers, because we depend on them for our survival. And that therefore, if we experience the good emotions that they're telling us, things like, be polite, share your toys, all those kind of messages, then we're more accepted, we're more loved, and we've got a better chance of surviving. So, commonly as a child, we might hear from our parents, be good. Now, that's not to say we're blaming the parents here. We're not saying that's the wrong message, but we're just saying that even those little words can have a massive impact on how we define and experience our emotions. So, that was the first module. I purposely stopped there because I could have gone down into further rabbit holes and gone on and on. But as said before, I wanted to keep these modules fairly short and sweet. But if there's anything you heard in there that you'd like to hear more of, or have got questions about it, feel free to drop a comment on the video and we can discuss it further. Till the next module, feel supersonic.